31st July 1943, Mount Tambu, New Guinea, 1400 hours. The temperature is 34 degrees Celsius. Humidity approaches 95%. The jungle is so dense that visibility extends barely 10 meters in any direction. The ground is mud, thick enough to pull boots off feet. Rain falls intermittently, adding to the misery. Private Leslie Allen, 2nd Battalion, 14th Australian Infantry Regiment, stands 6 feet 3 inches tall. He weighs approximately 93 kilograms, all muscle. His arms are massive from years of hauling lumber in the forests of South Australia. His shoulders are broad enough that he has to turn sideways to move through dense undergrowth. His hands, when spread, measure nearly 30 centimeters from thumb to little finger. He is carrying a man on his back, an American, wounded. The American weighs approximately 70 kilograms plus equipment. Allen walks through the jungle, up a slope, under sporadic Japanese fire. He has been walking for 40 minutes. His legs burn. His back screams. He does not stop. This is the 12th man he has carried today. The photograph taken later will become iconic. Allen, massive and bearded, carrying a wounded American soldier who looks small against his frame. The American's face shows pain and exhaustion. Allen's face shows nothing but concentration. The image will be published in newspapers across Australia and America. It will become a symbol of Allied cooperation, of Australian toughness, of what soldiers will do for each other regardless of nationality. But the photograph cannot convey the weight, cannot show the mud sucking at his boots with each step, cannot capture the sound of Japanese machine guns firing from positions barely 50 meters away, cannot explain why an Australian private decided to carry 12 American soldiers to safety when he could have stayed in cover and survived. To understand that, you need to understand who Leslie Allen was before the war. He was born in Ballarat, Victoria, on 10th July 1916. His parents were working class. His father died when Leslie was young. His mother remarried. The family was poor but stable. Leslie grew up large. By age 14, he was already taller than most adults. By 16, he weighed over 80 kilograms and still growing. School was difficult, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he was poor at sitting still. He wanted to work with his hands, to be outdoors, to do something physical. He left school at 14 and worked various jobs: logging, construction, farm labor, any work that required strength rather than education. He acquired the nickname Bull, partly for his size, partly for his temperament. He was not quick to anger, but once provoked, unstoppable. A pub fight in Ballarat in 1936 demonstrated this. 3 men attacked him over some minor dispute. He put all 3 in the hospital. He was arrested, fined, and acquired a reputation. People learned not to provoke the bull, but those who knew him well described a gentle man. He liked animals, spent hours with horses on farms where he worked. He was kind to children, patient with people slower or weaker than himself. The aggression only appeared when threatened or when someone weaker was being bullied. Then he became dangerous. He was also a pacifist. This seems contradictory given his later military service. But in the late 1930s, Allen genuinely believed war was wrong. He attended church regularly. He believed in Christian principles of nonviolence. He refused to fight in conflicts he considered unjust. When the war began in September 1939, Allen did not enlist. He was not avoiding combat from cowardice. He was avoiding it from conviction. He believed the war was European nonsense, unrelated to Australia, not worth Australian lives. He continued working in the forests, ignoring the pressure to join up. Then came December 1941. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Japan invaded the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. Japan moved south toward Australia. The war was no longer European nonsense. It was an immediate threat to his country and his family. Allen enlisted on 20th January 1942. He was 25 years old. He listed his occupation as laborer. He did not mention his pacifist beliefs. Those beliefs had not disappeared. They had simply been overridden by necessity. Japan was invading. Australia needed soldiers. He was strong and capable. Therefore, he would fight. Basic training was absurd for him. The physical requirements, designed to break down and rebuild ordinary men, were trivial for someone who had spent years hauling logs. The obstacle course times, meant to be challenging. He completed carrying another soldier on his back for fun. The endurance marches that exhausted other recruits barely winded him. But the weapons training troubled him. He was an excellent shot, steady hands and good eyes. But he disliked killing. His instructors noted this hesitation. They pushed him harder. They explained that hesitation got you killed, got your mates killed. Either he learned to shoot to kill or he would wash out. Alan learned. He suppressed the discomfort. He qualified as marksman. He told himself that killing Japanese soldiers, who were invading his country and murdering civilians, was morally different from killing in a European war of empire. Whether he truly believed this or simply told himself he did remains unclear. He was assigned to the 14th Battalion, part of the 39th Australian Infantry Brigade. The battalion deployed to New Guinea in January 1943. Their mission was to push Japanese forces back from positions threatening Port Moresby, the key Allied base in the region. New Guinea was hell, not metaphorically. Literally hell. The terrain was mountainous jungle, so steep that men climbed using vines and roots. The vegetation was dense enough to block sunlight. The heat and humidity were intolerable. Dysentery, malaria, and tropical ulcers afflicted nearly every soldier. Supply lines barely functioned. Food was often unavailable. Water had to be collected from streams and purified with tablets that caused stomach cramps. Japanese forces occupied fortified positions on ridges and mountains. They had artillery, machine guns, and prepared defenses. The Australians had to attack uphill, through jungle, against enemies who knew the terrain and had months to prepare. The fighting was brutal. Not the sweeping tank battles of North Africa, not the artillery barrages of Europe, just small unit actions in dense jungle. Patrol encounters patrol. Machine gun nests ambush advancing infantry. Snipers kill from concealed positions. Bodies remain where they fall because recovery is too dangerous. Alan adapted. His size, which had been an asset in logging and pub fights, became a liability in jungle combat. He could not move quietly. His silhouette was too visible. He could not fit into standard foxholes, but his strength remained useful. He carried extra ammunition. He hauled machine guns. He pulled wounded men to cover when others lacked the strength. In May 1943, the 14th Battalion participated in the battle for Libabia Ridge. Japanese forces held the high ground. Australian and American units were tasked with assaulting the position. The attack began on 20th May. It immediately stalled. Japanese machine guns swept the approaches. Casualties mounted. The advance failed. Allied forces regrouped and tried again on 21st May. Same result. The Japanese positions were too strong. The jungle was too dense for artillery to effectively target them. Infantry assaults without artillery support were suicide. The attack stalled again. This pattern repeated for weeks. Assault. Fail. Regroup. Assault again. Casualties accumulated. Soldiers developed what was called jungle fatigue, a combination of physical exhaustion, disease, and psychological breakdown from constant combat in intolerable conditions. Men who had fought bravely for months suddenly could not function. They shook uncontrollably. They wept. They refused to leave foxholes. Alan did not break. His physical toughness extended to psychological resilience, the conditions that destroyed others. He endured, not happily, not without suffering, but he endured. In late July 1943, Australian and American forces launched another offensive against Japanese positions near Mount Tambu. The Americans were from the 126th Infantry Regiment, 32nd Infantry Division. They had been fighting in New Guinea since January. They were as exhausted and disease-ridden as the Australians. The plan was coordinated assault. Americans would attack from one direction, Australians from another. Together, they would overwhelm the Japanese positions. The attack began 30th of July at 0600 hours. It failed immediately. Japanese defensive fire was overwhelming. American troops advancing up the slope encountered interlocking fields of machine gun fire. They could not advance. They could not retreat without exposing themselves. They went to ground, pinned down approximately 200 meters from the Japanese positions. Casualties were heavy. The Americans had approximately 30 wounded within the first hour. Medical corpsmen tried to reach them but were shot. Stretcher bearers were killed. The wounded remained where they fell, calling for help, bleeding, dying. The Australian units, attacking from a different approach, also stalled. They achieved slightly better positions but could not break through. By 1400 hours, the attack had failed. Both Australian and American commanders were considering withdrawal. That was when Alan saw the wounded Americans. They were visible from his position, approximately 150 meters away across a ravine. He could hear them calling for medics. He could see the corpsmen trying and failing to reach them. He watched as wounded men, unable to wait for rescue, tried to crawl back to friendly lines. Some made it, some were shot while crawling. Alan made a decision. He told his squad leader he was going to get the Americans. The squad leader, Sergeant Bill Middleton, told him he was insane. Japanese machine guns covered that entire area. Crossing the ravine would mean certain death. Even if Alan somehow reached the Americans, he could not carry them back. Not under fire. Not through that terrain. Alan disagreed. He believed he could do it. The Japanese were concentrating fire on areas where groups of soldiers were visible. A single man, moving carefully, might pass unnoticed, and he was strong enough to carry wounded men. He had carried logs heavier than most soldiers. He could carry wounded Americans. Middleton could have ordered him to stay. Instead, Middleton wished him luck. Alan removed his pack, keeping only his rifle and canteen. He moved into the ravine. The descent was approximately 40 meters. Steep and muddy, Alan slid as much as walked. Using vines to control his descent, he reached the bottom without drawing fire. He crossed the ravine floor, approximately 30 meters of open ground covered with fallen logs and mud. Still no fire. He began climbing the opposite slope. This was harder. The mud was deeper. The incline was steeper. He used roots and vines to pull himself up. Halfway up, Japanese machine gun fire opened up. Rounds struck trees near him. He flattened against the slope, waited for the fire to shift, continued climbing. He reached the first wounded American at approximately 1415 hours. The soldier had been shot in the leg and abdomen. He was conscious but weak from blood loss. Alan checked the wounds quickly. The leg was survivable. The abdominal wound was serious but not immediately fatal if treated. Alan told the soldier he was taking him back. The soldier, seeing Alan's size in the Australian uniform, asked if he was real or a morphine hallucination. Alan told him he was real and to shut up. Alan lifted the soldier onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry. The soldier weighed approximately 70 kilograms, with equipment closer to 80. Alan stood, adjusted the weight, and began walking back down the slope. Japanese fire followed him. Machine gun rounds struck near his feet. Rifle fire snapped past his head. He kept walking. He could not run. The slope was too steep. The mud too thick. Running would mean falling, dropping the wounded man. He walked at a steady pace, placing each foot carefully, compensating for the weight on his shoulders. The descent took approximately 12 minutes. He reached the ravine floor, crossed it, climbed the opposite slope. He delivered the wounded American to Australian medics at approximately 1430 hours. The medics began treating the soldier. Alan turned around and headed back. The second soldier was perhaps 50 meters from the first. Alan repeated the process. Descent. Crossing. Climb. Locate soldier. Assess wounds. Lift. Carry back. This soldier was unconscious, shot in the shoulder and chest. Alan checked for pulse, found it weak but present, carried him back. Japanese fire intensified. They had noticed him now. A single large Australian moving repeatedly into the kill zone was unusual enough to draw attention. Snipers targeted him specifically. Machine gunners adjusted fire to bracket his path. He kept moving. The third soldier was the heaviest, approximately 85 kilograms before equipment. Alan lifted him with difficulty. The weight on the slope was nearly overwhelming. His legs trembled. His back felt like it would snap. He adjusted the load, found balance, continued. By the fifth soldier, Alan was exhausted. His legs were cramping. His shoulders were raw from carrying weight. His boots were destroyed from the mud and climbing. Japanese fire was constant now. They knew what he was doing. They were trying specifically to kill him. Rounds struck close enough to spray him with mud and wood fragments. He continued. Sixth soldier. Seventh. By the eighth, American soldiers in nearby positions were watching in disbelief. They provided covering fire when possible, shooting at Japanese positions to suppress the fire targeting Alan. It helped marginally. The Japanese positions were well protected. Small arms fire from range was mostly ineffective. Ninth soldier. 10th. Alan was moving mechanically now. Descent. Cross. Climb. Find. Lift. Carry. Descent. Cross. Climb. Deliver. Repeat. His mind had narrowed to just these actions. He was not thinking about the danger, not thinking about the exhaustion, just executing the sequence. By the 11th soldier, Alan was hallucinating from heat exhaustion and dehydration. The temperature, humidity, exertion, and adrenaline had pushed his body beyond normal limits. He saw colors too bright. Sounds seemed distant. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, but his body kept moving. Trained reflexes executing actions his conscious mind could barely register. The 12th soldier was wounded in both legs. He could not walk. He was semi-conscious from pain and blood loss. Alan lifted him, noted distantly that this one was lighter than average, maybe 65 kilograms. He carried him back across the ravine one final time. He delivered the 12th soldier to the medics at approximately 1730 hours. He had been making trips for over 3 hours. He had carried 12 men. Total weight transported over 3,000 kilograms across approximately 3.6 kilometers of jungle terrain under continuous enemy fire. He had been shot at hundreds of times. He had not been hit once. He collapsed after delivering the last soldier. Medics checked him immediately, expecting wounds. They found none. No bullet holes. No shrapnel. Just exhaustion, dehydration, and shoulders rubbed raw from the weight. They gave him water. He drank. They gave him food. He could not eat, too nauseous from exertion. They told him to rest. He lost consciousness, sleeping for 14 straight hours. The American soldiers he had rescued were treated and evacuated. Of the 12, 11 survived. One died from his wounds during evacuation. The survival rate, given the severity of injuries and the delay before rescue, was remarkable. Without Alan's intervention, all 12 would likely have died from blood loss, shock, or subsequent Japanese attacks. The American commanders learned of Alan's actions that night. They wanted to award him a medal. The Medal of Honor was discussed but technically unavailable to non-American personnel. They recommended him for the Silver Star, the Distinguished Service Cross, any high American decoration that could be awarded to an ally. The Australian command also recommended him for the Victoria Cross. The citation detailed his actions, repeatedly entering the kill zone under heavy fire, carrying wounded men to safety, displaying extraordinary bravery and physical endurance. Alan did not want medals. When officers interviewed him about the action, he was uncomfortable. He explained that the Americans were wounded. Someone needed to get them. He was strong enough to carry them. Therefore he did. This was not heroism in his view. This was simply what the situation required. The officers persisted. What motivated him to risk his life for American soldiers? They were allies, certainly, but not his direct responsibility. Alan's answer was simple. They were wounded. They needed help. Nationality was irrelevant. This attitude was not unique to Alan, but it was unusual. The Australian and American forces in New Guinea respected each other, but tensions existed. Different tactics, different command structures, different cultures. Australian soldiers found Americans too casual about discipline. American soldiers found Australians too informal. The cooperation worked, but was not always smooth. Alan's actions cut through this. He did not rescue those men because they were Americans or because it would improve Allied relations. He did it because they were wounded soldiers and he could help. The simplicity of this motivation impressed everyone who heard about it. The medals came anyway. Alan received the Silver Star from the American Army in August 1943. The ceremony was awkward. The commanding American general read the citation, emphasizing Alan's heroism and the brotherhood between Australian and American forces. Photographers took pictures. Alan stood stiffly in clean uniform, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. The photograph of him carrying the wounded American was taken shortly after the action, staged for military photographers who had heard about it. The American soldier in the photograph was one of the men Alan had rescued, cooperative in recreating the moment. The photograph shows Alan's size, his strength, the intimacy of one soldier carrying another to safety. The image was published widely. American newspapers ran it with headlines about Australian hero saving American boys. Australian newspapers emphasized the alliance and shared sacrifice. The photograph became iconic, reproduced in magazines, books, propaganda materials. Alan hated it. He disliked being photographed. He especially disliked being used for propaganda. He understood the value of promoting Allied cooperation, but resented being made into a symbol. He was a soldier, not a poster. He wanted to return to his unit and be left alone. The Australian command did recommend him for the Victoria Cross, but the recommendation was downgraded to the Silver Star equivalency already awarded. The reasoning was complex, partly American politics, wanting their own award to be the primary recognition, partly Australian military bureaucracy, which had specific criteria for the Victoria Cross that emphasized combat against the enemy rather than rescue operations. Partly bad luck. The recommendation arriving during administrative reorganization, Allen never received the Victoria Cross. He did not complain. He had never wanted it anyway. What bothered him more was that soldiers under his command who performed equally brave actions received no recognition because they were not photographed or did not rescue Americans. He continued serving in New Guinea through 1944. The campaign ground on slow advances through impossible terrain against determined Japanese resistance. Disease continued killing more soldiers than combat. Malaria, dysentery, scrub typhus. Allen contracted malaria 3 times, evacuated to field hospitals, treated with quinine, returned to duty. In December 1944, he was evacuated to Australia with severe malaria and tropical ulcers on his legs that would not heal. The doctors determined he was medically unfit for further jungle service. He spent months recovering. By the time he was healthy enough to return, the war was nearly over. Japan surrendered in August 1945. Allen was discharged in September 1945. He returned to civilian life in South Australia. He worked in lumber mills, construction, various manual labor jobs. He married in 1946. He had children. He lived quietly. The fame from the photograph followed him intermittently. Newspapers would run anniversary stories. Veterans organizations wanted him to speak. He declined most invitations. He did not enjoy talking about the war. When pressed, he would tell the basic facts. He carried wounded Americans. They survived. That was all. In interviews conducted decades later, he was asked why he had done it. Why risk his life repeatedly for soldiers from another country? His answer remained consistent. They needed help. He could provide it. Nothing else mattered. This simplicity frustrated interviewers expecting deeper meaning. They wanted stories about heroism, about Allied brotherhood, about the bonds between warriors. Allen provided none of this. He had seen wounded men. He had carried them to safety. End of story. But people who served with him added details Allen would not. They described how he had volunteered for every dangerous assignment, how he had carried wounded Australians the same way he carried the Americans, how he had once carried a wounded Japanese soldier to Australian medics, ignoring protests that the enemy did not deserve help. Allen had replied that wounded was wounded. This was the key to understanding him. Allen had no complex ideology, no sophisticated moral framework, just simple principles. Strong people helped weak people. Wounded people needed assistance. Nationality, politics, even enmity became irrelevant when someone was injured and suffering. His pacifism before the war made sense in this context. He opposed war because it created suffering. He joined the war because Japanese invasion created more suffering than fighting would. He fought, but he never enjoyed it. And when presented with wounded men, enemy or ally, his instinct was always to help. This made him unusual in military context. Soldiers are trained to categorize, friend or enemy, ally or opponent, us versus them. Allen's categories were simpler, hurt or not hurt, can help or cannot help. These categories overrode training and ideology. American soldiers he rescued stayed in contact with him after the war. Letters arrived periodically, Christmas cards, birth announcements. They wanted him to know their children existed because he had saved them. They wanted to express gratitude that words could not adequately convey. Allen answered the letters politely but briefly. He was glad they survived. He hoped their lives were good. He did not need thanks. Anyone would have done the same. This last statement was not true. Most people would not have made 12 trips under fire to rescue foreign soldiers. But Allen genuinely believed they would have. He saw his actions as ordinary response to extraordinary circumstances. In 1991, the American government revisited his case. New documentation had emerged. Eyewitness accounts were compiled. The decision was made to upgrade his Silver Star to the Distinguished Service Cross, second highest American military decoration. The ceremony occurred at the Australian Embassy in Washington. Allen attended, aged 75. He wore his old uniform, which barely fit. He stood while the citation was read. The American general presenting the medal spoke about courage, about sacrifice, about the bonds between allies. Allen listened politely. When the medal was pinned on, he thanked them and sat down. In interviews after the ceremony, he was asked if he felt the recognition was overdue. He said no. He said the medal was not important. What was important was that the soldiers he rescued had lived, had families, had good lives. That was the only recognition that mattered. He died on 11th May 1902, aged 85. His funeral was attended by family, some veterans, and several Americans he had rescued who traveled to Australia specifically to pay respects. They spoke at the service. They described what he had done. They explained that their children and grandchildren existed because of him. They said he was the best man they had ever known. Alan would have been embarrassed by this. He had not done anything special. He had just carried wounded men. Anyone else would have done the same. This belief, that his actions were ordinary rather than extraordinary, defined him. It was simultaneously true and false. True because in his moral framework, helping wounded people was simply what you did. False because empirically, most people did not do what he did. Most people did not make 12 trips under fire. Most people did not carry 3,000 kilograms across jungle terrain while being shot at. But Alan's genius, if it can be called that, was not seeing this as exceptional. He saw it as baseline behavior. Of course you helped wounded people. Of course you risked yourself to save others. Of course nationality was irrelevant. What else would you do? This worldview made him a remarkable soldier, not because he killed effectively, but because he preserved life effectively. His contribution to the war was not measured in enemy casualties, but in Allied soldiers who survived because he carried them to safety. The photograph captures this. Alan's massive frame supporting a wounded man. The physical representation of strength used to protect rather than destroy. The image became iconic because it showed what people wanted to believe about war. That even in hell, humanity persisted. That soldiers from different countries would risk everything for each other. That strength could be gentle. Alan was all of this. He was also just a man who saw wounded soldiers and decided to help. The photograph, the medals, the recognition, none of it changed what he believed about what he had done. Years after the war, he was asked a final time why he had carried those 12 Americans. He was old then. His strength faded, his health failing. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "They were hurt. I was strong. That was all there was to it." That was Leslie Allen, the bull, the mountain of a man who carried 12 wounded Americans to safety, who received medals he did not want for actions he considered ordinary, who believed that helping wounded people was simply what you did. History remembers the photograph. The image of strength in service of compassion, the visual proof that even in the jungle hell of New Guinea, in the midst of brutal combat, one man could see past nationality and politics to simple human need. The Americans he rescued remembered the weight, the feeling of being lifted by someone impossibly strong, the relief of knowing they would not die alone on that slope, the gratitude that never faded. Alan remembered carrying them, the mud, the weight, the Japanese fire, the repetitive motion, descent, crossing, climb, lift, carry, 12 times, because they needed help and he could provide it. Nothing else mattered.